Good. So good morning. I want to apologize first for being late. It's been a hectic morning. We were supposed to originally have Thomas Wilkins online with us, and he had an emergency. So we filled in last minute. We're supposed to have one more joining us, Curtis, but we did fill in our space. And I did reach out to a few of you, so I want to thank you all because I had an amazing response of those of you who were willing to step in last minute. And I will be calling on you at some point. So we're going to start out really quick since we are running late. I'm going to let my speakers introduce themselves and just tell you a little bit about them. But if you want to find out the real details, go to LinkedIn. And they're all on there. They're all active. So go ahead and find them. And Tony, you are in my top corner. So we'll start with you. And then I'll let you pass it on to whichever one is next to you.
Well, great, Christine. And I think we all just need to take a little bit of a deep breath as we start this opportunity to talk about precision medicine and some of the things that we've been bantering about before the call, knowing that there are plenty of people here who we would like to learn from as well, including yourself as a patient. But my background is that I have been working for years in medical education. I was a publisher of medical journals for many years. And after that, I was building online digital communities, mostly in the rare disease spaces. So what we did was we brought in people into a safe online community, kind of like a Facebook, but instead of serving them ads, we would build knowledge libraries as guided by the people like experts in the community, from healthcare professionals, advocates like yourselves and other patients. And we would interject those resources directly into their feeds as they're talking, okay? So, and most recently, I've been working in precision medicine with a lab based in San Francisco, California. And we do a fair amount of work, not only just on the next generation sequencing side for germline conditions, but we also do a fair amount of work with companies and with patient advocacy groups, with registries and with programs where they need information regarding tests and patients to get to clinical trials and things like that. So that's where I come from. And I would like to pass the virtual baton to my virtual colleague, Vanessa, who's coming to you live from the great state of Washington.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Christine, for pulling together this panel. I think the topic is very interesting and feeds on the panels that you've had in the past and hopefully ones that will continue going forward. I think these are important conversations, good opportunities to hear different perspectives, to hear how we define genetics differently and how people are using it. Technology changes quickly and access to information changes quickly. How we understand how to use it to make decisions that improve our lives is really important. So thank you and kudos for pulling this together. I'm Vanessa Rangel-Miller. I'm joining from the Northwest. I'm in the greater Seattle area. I've been in the genetics and rare disease field for over 15 years, working in laboratories, commercial and academic, working in technology and small software companies, building rare disease and not so rare disease patient online registries and communities. So very excited to bring the experiences and background I have to the discussion. I'm originally trained as a genetic counselor and have worked as prenatal, pediatric, and laboratory counseling settings. So thank you.
And then Arun, you're next because Curtis still hasn't joined us.
Right. So yeah, my name is Arun Kiran, and I work as a lead genetic counselor based in Hong Kong for a company called Prenetics, and we are in the direct-to-consumer space where we have different kind of inherited cancer panels and different other genetic tests, and at the same time, my role is to make sure that I give out different resources to people who are in need and also help them understand how genetics can be used as a tool to not only personalize, but also to help them lead a much healthier life. So it could be in different aspects of life, but of course, it could be catered to cancer or neuropsychiatry and different ways. So we try and delve into that specific area and we try and help as much as we can.
And thank you for joining us last minute because it is, what time is it over there for you? 11 o'clock at night?
Yes, it's 11:30.
So we are
Right.
keeping him up past his bedtime. So we'll try to
Um,
keep it to the point. I still haven't seen Curtis, so we'll go on. But Vanessa, from the standpoint of a patient, and actually a patient even being on the industry side, seeing everyone is confused about precision medicine. You say precision medicine, some people think genomics, some people think pharmacogenomics, some people think, DNA, it could lead to any of a number of things. So can you break down to us kind of in layman's terms, or really quick for anyone in industry who, or patients, or any of us that are going to be patients, what is it that we're trying to do here? What are we starting, or not starting, but what are we looking into for patients, and what's the difference between all of these different things out there? You've got 23andMe, you've got UScript, you've now got Invitae, you've got all these companies, and what do they mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as we open up the papers every day or read information online every day, we're seeing more and more terms related to genetics and related to precision medicine. And that information has been increasing and growing over the last decade at a remarkable pace. The terms can be mixed up. I think people mean different things when they say those various terms. So I think it's important as we hold conversations like this to kind of agree on what areas we're specifically talking about, because as technology evolves, our understanding of those terms evolve too. And when I think about precision medicine, I'm really thinking about the ability to tailor medical decisions, medical treatments to the information that we know about an individual patient. Now, that information can vary. What we know about a patient can vary. Maybe it's information about their DNA. Maybe it's information about their environment, their biology. I think there's a lot that goes into the precision medicine umbrella. What we talked about in our prep call a little bit was helping to further define and clarify information about genetics, about that aspect of precision medicine, which is one that receives a lot of attention because genetics is used in a variety of ways throughout a person's lifetime. Genetics can be used starting very early in life. Genetics is used for newborn screening, for instance, to help screen babies born in the US or beyond for a variety of early onset or notable chronic health conditions. Genetics can be used for diagnostic testing. So when a person has a medical condition or is suspected to have or at risk to have a medical condition, you can have genetic diagnostic testing, and there's various types of that. Different technologies can be used. You can also use genetics in a reproductive setting, whether that be carrier testing or prenatal testing. We can also think about broader uses of genetics. We can think about using genetics in administering or understanding a person's tolerance to different types of medications. We can think about genetics as it relates to oncology. Specifically, you might see somatic testing, so testing of tissue types, whether it be tumor or other tissue types in the body. And as well, consumer testing, that's the last one I haven't mentioned yet. But those are a few examples of how we think about genetics, and genetics being one component of what we think about in precision medicine. I think the important part too is to go back to some of the initial opening remarks, and I would love to invite my colleagues here, my co-panelists here, but understanding from the patient perspective, what does genetics mean for an individual person? And I think that's a really important conversation to have. And as we're having that conversation, to be sure we're clear on how we're thinking about using genetics, how we're thinking about using precision medicine, because that information and those healthcare decisions can vary throughout a person's life. So I'll pause there and see if Arun or Tony would like to add on.
Either of the two?
So
Yeah, sure.
Oh, Arun, after you, please.
Okay. Yeah. So I totally agree with Vanessa. I think the overall purpose of using genetic testing is to make sure that you cater to the real purpose for what the client or the end user is looking for. Because for everyone, the the overall cost could be different. For somebody who's planning for a family, they are looking into family planning, testing. And somebody who's really in a critical situation in an ICU, but wants to understand what kind of medication is going to work effectively for them. That's where you need to, look into pharmacogenomic aspect, which is what is very crucial, because it is a life-saving decision which can totally, make it in or out for that person. So I think there's a huge amount of, I would say, broader area of where you can use genetics. But of course, it comes down to the point where what is the overall cause and what is the need for that individual person. So it could even be inherited cancers, right? Especially if some cancers are running in the family. And now we also know that, cancers don't necessarily have to be in the family. It can even be in the general population. So this is like mutations which are found. So all of this is like a very broad spectrum, and it totally depends on the individual person's need. So this is where I feel, it could be a huge add-on in somebody's wellness or in their health.
And as a patient, before we go to Tony, I've benefited from the pharmacogenomics myself. So I'm part of Stanford's human-wide program, and I did have a partial genome sequencing done by Invitae, sorry. And I also had my pharmacogenomics done. And so if those of you who are out there that don't know, I do have toxic encephalopathy related to a drug that I was on. It was the right drug for my disease, for someone my age, my weight, my height. I fit that category, but I'm a different person. And so instead of metabolizing this drug in the way that I was supposed to, I actually doubled the dose, causing brain damage. So this drug crossed my blood-brain barrier when it shouldn't have, only because of the way I metabolized it. We found out opioids, that I am opioid resistant, and I don't process them the same way that they do. So now in my charts, it specifically says dilaudid. So from a patient perspective, that part of the testing was hugely helpful and actually has changed the course of my treatment from now on, which comes in handy because I lost my medical records. So all of these drugs that I had been on that caused damage that I stopped, I would have had to try again if I wasn't part of this program. So from there, Tony, I'll let you take over and give your perspective on all of this so far.
Well, thanks, Christine, and Vanessa and Arun. Thank you so much for your opening statements, and there's so much to unpack, and so I don't want to kind of ramble down the road, but I want to focus on a few things that Vanessa brought up in relation to Christine's experience as a patient. And Vanessa did a great job laying kind of the groundwork of what precision medicine is generally, but also then with respect to kind of where genomics falls into that, and the different ways that we can use the technologies and the lab tests that are at hand are oftentimes a source of confusion for many people, including people who are steeped into it like myself. We have a very new yet old, right, science that is fast moving and very technology driven. And what are the meanings of those lab results? And so as part of this, understanding what people, and I'm not trying to divide between patients, advocates, caregivers, industry, because we're all humans. We're all going to be subject to some kind of condition over our lifetimes. And so where does genetics and testing them work for us? And Vanessa went through a whole bunch of them, including like reproductive testing. Christine talked about what's known as pharmacogenetics or pharmacogenomics, and the terminology can all sound a little similar at times, but they are very different types of things. She also talked about what are known as diagnostic tests. So those are ones that are medically valid to go and actually give to a physician to interpret and work with a patient on a treatment plan of some kind to give a diagnosis. And then there are, say, like preventative tests that are just kind of out there that can look at different very broad markers for indication about maybe what might happen happen down the road. And then she also mentioned consumer testing. I don't want to spend a lot of time, bouncing around back and forth between the different types of and grades of tests, but I do know that there's probably one or two people on this call that may have received a 23andMe or an Ancestry.com or something like that under their holiday, celebratory trees or wherever, and say, well, gee, I got tested for this, and I have read my report, and now I am subject to this horrible disease in the future. And I just like to caution people, because before I learned more about this, I was one of those 23andMe early adopters, and and I kind of didn't really know the meaning of this nice report that came back to me. I didn't know if it meant that I had these things or whether I needed to do more research. And basically there's a huge chasm between consumer grade testing like that and medical grade testing like laboratories. They're called LDTs, laboratory design tests, and they're usually administered by a lab that is certified and or licensed to do these things. So you look for something called CAP or CLIA. Okay, so those are the two acronyms you want to see on the website, because those kinds of labs can issue medical diagnostic reports, and that's what I think we really want to talk about today, are those kinds and that kind of level of information. And there's one last distinction I want to make, because Vanessa brought it up very quickly, but she mentioned the word somatic, right? Which is very different from germline. And those two different things are really important to understand as part of the testing, because germline testing is what my company Invitae does. It's a little bit about what you were talking about, Christine, when it comes to pharmacogenomic testing. And somatic testing is a very different test. It is testing DNA, but it's testing DNA of a tumor. Okay, so that within that tumor itself has a certain piece of genetic variant, or what's also known as a mutation. Looking back at germline testing, germline is more like it sounds. It's within our hereditary DNA that's throughout our entire bodies. Now we can talk about mosaicism and other things like that, but that's just getting a little bit too much into the weeds. But why I am going through this, and for some on the call who know this back and forth, is mostly because I understand what you said earlier about being new to this and being offered some kind of genetic information and having really a lot of questions around what is gene sequencing, whole genome sequencing, exome sequencing. I have cancer, I got a genetic test for it. I think it's very different. So I wanted to kind of lay out these building blocks, and hopefully as we go through the conversation, if there are people who want to mention something in the comments, we'd be happy to answer those kinds of questions or put links to information about it. But Christine, just to last focus on your pharmacogenomic testing, that is something that has been around for a while, but it's an evolving science that helps us understand how we metabolize certain drugs and compounds that we put in our system. So when I did my consumer test, I found out I don't metabolize caffeine, right? So just kind of, I could have an espresso at 9 o'clock at night and I'm in bed at 9:15, right? A lot of people who have caffeine that late, they'll be up for hours, right? So we metabolize those kinds of drugs differently. So that can also work with prescription drugs as well. So if we get prescribed something, it may not work the same way for you as it does for me. And pharmacogenomics is the study or the testing that helps our doctors understand whether we are, like me, a non-metabolizer, or like Christine, where she super metabolized something, okay? And that way they can help adjust our treatment plans to be more effective. And I apologize for going on so long, but I really just wanted to make sure that that foundation got laid out in detail for the caller, or for the listeners. Thanks.
No, definitely. No apologies necessary, because I think sometimes we forget that there's other people at different levels that don't understand everything. So I appreciate that. And you kind of answered the question that was asked for me, was how could the damage done to you have been prevented, and what steps can others take? So I think, basically, at that time when they were giving me this medication, that was not an option for me for the testing. And we found this out later down the line. So it has adjusted my treatments, though, with different compounds that stay in my records that are saying that she metabolizes this compound in this way. So it has helped me. And I think, you know, in the future, we know now that if I were ever to take this drug, we would cut my dose in half. So it's helped me in that way. So, but there was a question for you, Tony, on how do you handle the data issues and the privacy on all of this? It's always data. Always comes back to data.
It is. It is. So I'm fond of pushing a book that I have no financial interest in by Shoshana Zuboff, who's a Harvard professor who's been studying data as the new oil for many years. It's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Be happy to send anybody a link to it. But from that book, it really does show me that data is what is driving everything as energy going forward, right? So it's another source, like water was to water wheels back in the colonial days, right? So if data is going to be that energy source going forward, I think a lot of us are asking questions about privacy and who controls it and who's got the power over it and who can they share it with, and can I get paid for my data, and what data are you using, and how can that come back to haunt me? Is it going to violate insurance, insurance policies and all sorts of things? So how do I deal with the data? It's kind of a very big question, but when it comes to what we're talking about today is precision medicine, I would like to, and genomics in particular, I would like to mention there are a couple of course, laws that help now. I will admit that I used to be an attorney a long time ago in a land far, far away. But as part of that, it's always been a special interest to me. And looking at the federal laws, which are broadly applicable to all the states, is something called GINA, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. Okay, that's GINA is the acronym for it. And it has in it a number of provisions that help protect our genetic information from being used against us, okay? Mostly in the insurance industry, okay? So while it's not the panacea that we all hoped it would be, it might one day become something like that, but it is something that is very powerful and can help protect our data that way. Another one I think we all know is HIPAA. HIPAA, 2 A's. No, I always see 2 P's.
I do 2 P's too.
I'm silently correcting it. Well, anyway, I hope that that is something that we all can just kind of skip over, knowing that that's there. We oftentimes waive our rights to HIPAA protections as part of seeing doctors and tests. Okay, and so that is something that. Those are 2 things that can provide us with a lot of protection. But then what happens when we do sign away those rights, right? What happens to the companies that get them? What happens if we, hit I agree on those terms of service to get the service online, or add the app to our phone, right? Those contracts of adhesion. Well, they're valid. That's the thing about them. And they oftentimes gives away pretty unlimited rights to companies to do things with data. Now, there are, kind of built-in protections. I'm not really talking about GDPR over in Europe, right? But California has adopted many of the same types of provisions, and they are rolling out in other states. So GDPR is the Good Data, General Data Protection Regulations. Thanks, Vanessa.
We can go with good.
Your lips there. and as part of that, it's really understanding that we, as consumers, have very little rights in our data at this time. Okay. While we have some privacy protections, we often just give it away. And that's how these companies that are mentioned in this book, we all know by name, are taking our data and doing many, many, many things with it. And we might have no problem with that, right? But for genomic information, I think people are a little concerned, and I'm one of them, like, how is this going to come back to haunt me? And even though there are things like GINA, I still don't have, I want to make this clear, like, I don't have an ownership right in my data. A lot of people will say, like, things like, well, I own my data, the company doesn't own my data, the testing, right? That's not necessarily true, right? There's difference between ownership rights and laws around privacy. And I don't want to get into that deeply, but like, I own my car, I own my house, right? I don't own my data. And that is going to be the source of energy for fueling everything in the future. Auto driving cars. I mean, every time we do one of those do you see stoplights or sidewalks or crosswalks? We're actually training visual sight types of algorithms for auto driving cars. It's not just to verify our identity as human. Okay. So how do I protect it? I make sure that I do as much as I can to feel safe by keeping my online anonymity as much as I can. But it is a very difficult thing to do. And the question is, what kind of benefits am I going to get for giving up my privacy rights to this data? And I'd really like to hear what you, Christine, as a patient, like oftentimes patients are very willing to give up data to get results. And I know Vanessa has worked in registries before, and she has a lot of information, experience around that. And I'd like to hear Arun's thoughts on it too. So thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to hear Arun's thoughts on it as well. For me, sure. I mean, everybody knows my thoughts as a patient. I do think patients should own their own data. I think that if I have a rare disease or a rare condition, if I cannot be self-sufficient on my own by working, and nobody wants to hire me and give me insurance, I at least should have an option to survive. And if everybody else is making money off of my data, as a patient, I'm kind of looking at this space saying, what about me? I had a pharma guy the other day tell me, I had talked about patients being involved in clinical trials. And I said, I understand that it's unethical to pay patients in a clinical trial. But if we're talking about money and ethics, it should be unethical for you to make money off of me for a clinical trial. So I don't know. I see it as a space that, obviously is going to be a hot button. I'm prepared with it. Apparently, I do own my data with my pharmacogenomics. I have the paperwork. I'm free to do whatever I want with it. So Vanessa, I want you to look at it. But I don't know, Arun, your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think, what Tony mentioned is very accurate in terms of how, nobody does tend to own the data, but in the sense that you do have to ensure that companies have these certain compliances, and also to make sure that their servers are secure, and whether they have specific parameters to ensure that the data is secure. So these are the things that you have to do some kind of a due diligence from a client per se, and that's something that you have to look into, because if you look into every different geographical location, if you're buying a test, let's say in Europe, then of course it has to be compliant with the GDPR. And also if you're buying, let's say in Asia, there are not many compliances that you have to abide to. So that's why it's a little bit dicey. So you have to look into these companies specific guidelines and see whether they are in accordance with that.
I was going to ask you, being our international panelist, your thought. I mean, because obviously it works a little different. And what are your thoughts on how things work there versus what we're doing here? I mean, it's there.
Right. I mean, we are also, pretty much doing things like how, Invite is doing. So we have a whole exome sequencing platform. We are also, getting into the medical space where we are also doing panel-based testing. So we're looking at certain conditions where certain genes are being tested. So mostly germline testing. We don't do any kind of somatic testing. So that's something that we are into. And we are also doing, as one of those consumer-based testing like 23andMe, but much better platform, which is, what 23andMe does is they are running on a chip-based technology, which is like a GSA platform, where you only get certain number of markers results, which is like 700K or so. But when you're doing whole exome or whole genome, you're looking at the whole protein coding part of the DNA, and which is massive. You're talking about around 31 to 32 million data points. So these are the differences which clients don't understand, and they think whatever they get in the report is pretty much the real truth, but this is not how it works. So I think there is a lot of information that is out there, but it's up to the clients to look at the resources, which is going to divert them towards the right specific source. So this is where it comes to the, even let's say in terms of being anonymous, especially if you're trying to do a genetic test and you're not giving out your own details, you can still track the person. I mean, that's very scary. It might as sound. So if you look at the case of Golden State, the killer, in that case, they track through the genealogical tree. So you can, clearly understand how scary it can be, especially if the feds get into the data, they can access it whatever they want. So this is a very interesting topic in itself. But having said that, yes, you have to be a little bit cautious and make sure that the company that you're trying to do the genetic testing, they are in compliance with all of these specific laws, as well as the specific security parameters. And whenever you're downloading data from any of these companies, don't upload in third-party services. I would definitely not suggest that to any of them, because I see a huge number of clients doing that. Like, they want to download the data and upload it to some third-party companies, and they don't understand that these guys are going to mint money from the data that you have actually uploaded, because they have no cost for sequencing. They don't have any cost for marketing. All they're doing is giving your own data to some other, big pharmas or whatsoever, right? So this is why you have to be very cautious. So yeah, I would like to hear Vanessa's thoughts on that as well.
I did want to say really quick, you did mention big pharma, and I was wondering on that part of it,
Right.
It's not looked at in that space. When I go to pharma conferences, precision medicine is not something that's really looked at. And I know in the other side of it with pharma, it's always about the ROI. And, so if I were someone in industry and I'm telling you that if I run all of these tests, what I've heard is we're going to uncover all of these other problems, and I'm going to end up spending all of this much more money, uncovering more problems that I can't figure out. So what do you guys, your thoughts on that? Because I think it's an interesting topic, because it really doesn't, precision medicine doesn't come up very much at a pharma conference unless it involves rare disease. So aside from that, where do you see the benefits for these companies? Because we've got some of them listening. So what can we, kind of say where we're all on board and agreeant? Anyone want to pick first? Arun, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I look at different avenues for this. I mean, it's quite interesting because I've been, researching about these aspects. And I think, number one, yes, these companies out there, not only pharma, but there could be some, big major, corporations, which can look into certain genetic mutations where, I mean, from the studies, you can see if they are someone who are, heavy spenders. You can actually use it as a marketing tool to push ads to those people who are impulsive buyers. Now, this is one angle to it. Now, there is also often drug, development. So where you can actually use the genetic data to find out specific mutations, which can help them to, develop drugs, which can work on those specific protein mechanism. So these are one, this is one of the aspects of, how you can use a huge set of data to actually develop a drug. So this is one aspect of it. And then, of course, you can use a set of clinical, set of cases where you have the genetic data, especially in, let's say, in somatic, and then you can use those information to, understand, okay, these are the set of people whose genetic mutations are these, and how certain drugs are more effective in these people. So one of the best examples I can give is recently there was, not recently, but a few years ago, a drug called olaparib, which was, launched by AstraZeneca, which is very targeted towards specifically those people who have mutations, which are germline mutations in this BRCA genes. So BRCA gene, which is associated with breast cancer. So it will work more effectively for them if you tend to have genetic mutations, this specific drug. So this is like PARP inhibitor class of drugs. So this is the huge value. So this is basically based on data, which they are able to release it into the market where the end user can actually take the benefit of it. So yeah, so there are different avenues, but I think it comes down to the point where the money is. So that's why these things are going to be, eventually fading away towards that aspect. So that's why I hope that answers your question in terms of why they are not talking about personalized medicine.
And I want to hear from Vanessa too, but I do want to say, when we're talking about profits, if you're looking at me, I've become a $300,000 maintenance patient. And that is only because of damage from medications. So had I, I have 3 joint replacements, which we all know will eventually have to be replaced again. I have cognitive behavioral therapy with the brain issues. I have constant MRIs and treatments. So if we're looking at it from another standpoint, it's actually saving you money from the damage that you're causing for people and actually keeping their quality of life to somewhat of a quality of life. So Vanessa, you want to give me your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's what you bring up, Christine. We thank you for sharing your story because that's important. And my sense that from talking with stakeholders in precision medicine and in genetics and in rare disease, people are often saying they didn't know this, right? They didn't know aspects of the story. They didn't know how to access information. And much of what we're talking about is really an evolving science. That information as it relates to precision medicine, whether it be genetics or beyond, that's information that we're continuing to learn. Genetics and our interpretation of genetics and how it affects the body and health is an area that we're continuing to learn. These are living pieces of information, living test results. So I think it's important to remember a few key points. How do we make sure that there is access to the information about our test results, genetic test results, for example, so that we can continue to learn from them over time, so we can follow the science and understand when new meaning is available? How do we have access to folks like genetic counselors who can help us understand the meaning today as it relates to genetics, the meaning in the future, and what it means for not only ourselves, but also our family members? So I think, that access and education component of precision medicine and of genetics in precision medicine is one that's really important and not always well structured or easily available. And the last piece I would add too is within the US specifically, the healthcare system is much more fragmented than we might see outside of the US. And so that information, Christine, as you yourself have mentioned and experienced, that information doesn't always carry forward. It may not be accessible to all clinicians who are managing our healthcare, who are ordering other tests, who are performing procedures or administering therapeutic regimens. And so I think that is a big gap in how our healthcare is currently designed, is that inability to exchange information easily in order to ensure that we're receiving the most appropriate care.
That is a huge problem. And hopefully, people with empathy, wherever my logo is, we're trying to help with that. My floating head is supposed to come in and say yes, but he's not on his game. I have Spannon in the background. We did get a question that's asking, what challenges and opportunities do drug developers face from precision medicine? Anyone want to take that first? Tony, we haven't heard from you in a minute. You want to go?
Thanks, Christine. I'd like to preface my answer by saying I'm not nor I ever have been a drug developer.
We're just asking for perspective.
But my perspective as somebody who does work with them quite often is that first, there are a lot of really amazing people doing a lot of hard work in pharma companies. There are just some very super intelligent, dedicated, smart people who want to help change the world around many different conditions, and genetic diseases are evolving to the point where people can actually make progress with it. And there are things that pharma companies can do, and I think are doing. I think to bridge those kinds of gaps, they're not only doing things like building patient advocacy groups within their companies to be able to listen to the patient voice, hear what's going on in that community, see what the real needs are to develop treatments that work for that community, for the specific symptoms and or manifestations that they are mostly concerned about. We've seen that in the DMD community, quite honestly, with the 6-minute walk test years back, which is now like the standard for DMD testing. And Vanessa worked with the DMD communities a lot to understand that. But insofar as pharma is concerned, there's I hate to go back to the law again, but there is a law that passed a few years ago under the Obama administration called the 21st Century Cures Act, It may have been done then and passed during Trump. I don't know. But anyway, it's law. And so as part of that, the FDA was told they need to figure out how to bring the patient voice into the medicine's development continuum. And that's everything from preclinical, clinical phases 1 through 3, and also after FDA approval, right? So what's happening with the drug now that's out in the market? So as part of that, there's this thing called patient-focused drug development. Okay, so if drug developers are wondering what they can do, one of the things they can do if they haven't heard of this is find out more about it. Talk to your regulatory people, talk to your compliance people. There are guidances that have been issued about working with communities. There's something called a verified patient community, which is a place to start with gathering insights and data. There are patient-focused drug development meetings that are being held externally so that people can take the surveys and really have their specific issues known. So, it's one thing if a pharma company goes off and says, oh, this is a great compound, it does something, let's go figure it out. If the community's like, that's not going to help me manage my family, my condition, my disease, like, you're not going to get a lot of force behind that. I do think though that it's something that the companies and the patients are coming closer together. And that is an extraordinarily valuable thing, which is going to continue to evolve, I think, in that direction going forward.
Great response. Arun, any
Oh,
comment
yeah.
on how you think? How about we rephrase the question to not from a standpoint of that, but how you think it can help, or what?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can also help you understand also your audience, how, from what my understanding is in terms of how pharma tries to develop a drug is basically to recruit basically the clinical people. So that is the toughest part, because when you have to develop for the rare diseases, you have to have accumulation of certain number of patients who have been affected with the condition, and then you have to ensure that they fit in certain criteria, and at the same time you have to go to the clinical trial sites, and then you have to enroll. So there's a lot of work, and to identify these specific people is the biggest job at the very initial stage. And once you get hold of that, then you have to do the genetic testing, and then you have to find out especially in these people, what is the specific mutation which is known to be very different and which is very specifically I would say matching with that set of people. So this is where the whole R&D process comes in, and of course there's a lot of compliance and all of that, and how to do crunch the data and find out exactly what is the specific kind of drug that is going to act on that specific the molecule which is going to act on the protein, and how it is going to enhance, for example, in DMD or certain drugs that have been released. So this is the fair layman idea for people to understand. But yes, in terms of how people can help this community is by ensuring that they reach out to certain clinical trials that they are currently doing. I'm sure that is already happening, but I'm saying from a wider perspective, I think more people need to come out and voice out and go out to these specific groups and make sure that they pitch in some contribution. And that could be for the greater good for the whole society. Right? So yeah.
It's funny because when you're in a certain silo of industry, you feel like everybody knows about something. And then you leave that silo and you find out that nobody knows anything about it. So there's my mysterious head that keeps popping in. Sorry, Shannon, I'm on a green screen and Shannon's in the background. So my conscious keeps popping in to let me know what's happening. But we're almost out of time. We've got about 10 minutes left. Wait, is that right? No. How much time do we have left? 13 minutes left. So I would like to, the one thing I want to ask, first I want to say Curtis could not make it on. He had all these difficulties, so digital technology killed him today. And he's going to join us in another conversation later. But I did want to ask, so we've had this conversation, we've talked about all of these things, and everybody at some point is going to, and everyone I know, whether they're industry or not, patient or not, is interested in their data. They're interested in finding out from 23andMe, how much of a percentage are they this and are they that? And so when people are going out and looking for these things on their own, what should people be aware of? What should they be cautious of? What should they be looking for? I mean, because it's going to start coming out. What do these places offer? And how do I protect myself? So we'll go with Tony first, because again, you're right next to me.
Well, thanks, and I'll leave plenty of time for everybody else. I know Vanessa and Aaron have comments on this as well. But what are we looking for? I think it's got to be. We're talking about precision medicine, so it's about medicine. It's about being getting the diagnostic that is fit for purpose. Okay, so if we're talking about medicines and helping our clinicians and our specialists understand our genetic underpinnings, like Arun said earlier, like some of these tests just kind of skim across the top of the pond, which is fine, and it works really well for those purposes, which is typically like, you know, can I metabolize caffeine? You know, do I have slow twitch muscle tissue? You know, things like that, right? Not really going to impact my overall health and well-being dramatically, right? Those are also the types of tests that are being done in research institutions, right? So they're being done kind of, you know, broad-based, like Arun was saying, across an entire exome or an entire genome, okay? Because the data gets to be overwhelming if you go much deeper. These are like multiple passes. So what I'm really thinking about here for precision medicine is our diagnostic tests, which are done by many of these CAP and CLIA labs. Invitae is one. There are many out there to choose from. It's about trying to understand. One of the things is what panels they are, what conditions they're being tested for. Not every condition has a, you know, understood genetic basis. You know, some of the evidence is better for others, right? And then the other side of it is like, what other services are there, right? Is there somebody I can call and talk to who knows what they're talking about? Like Vanessa's a genetic counselor. You get Vanessa on the phone, like Christine was saying before, like she knows what she's talking about, and she can work with somebody who understands, who needs to relate their medical condition to their desire to be tested before they spend money on a test. Okay, insurance reimbursement is another piece. The cost of the test, that's a whole nother side of it. Maybe Vanessa or Arun could comment about that. And I'm sorry, Christine, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to say that you're right in that. When you get this information back, it is a lot of stuff that does not make sense. Mm-hmm. And so when I got my results back, Spannon was with me, we spent 2 hours with my genetic counselor, and we could have spent more. And I still don't know half of what it means. So, you know, so I want to tell people, it's not like you order this test result and then get it and you can figure out things on your own. You can't do that. And you do need a genetic counselor or somebody who is informed to tell you these things. Because I can tell you all these different things and it means something completely different to me than it does to a researcher. So, and then I'll let you guys step in now because sorry.
Well, considering Vanessa's a genetic counselor, how about we hear from you about that very point? I think you're on.
You're muted, Vanessa. I still see it. There's a little button that tells me to ask someone to unmute.
Thank you. Apologies. I also had technical difficulties. The screen froze and I couldn't access the buttons.
Don't worry. We're good.
It's Monday, right? So Arun, you can probably weigh in here too. You know, I think some of the points that Tony brought up are really important. You know, a few points that we didn't touch on, things like access and cost and insurance. But I want to focus a little bit more on the thread of what does this mean for me? Also, what does it mean for my family? And test results that we receive today could be reinterpreted in 5 years and provide additional context, especially if the information today is limited. There's new discoveries happening in genetics and in precision medicine all of the time. And so I think when Tony started to describe that it's important to consider the context of the test being ordered in terms of what type of information is needed to make an informed medical decision. That's a really important piece. Using the right test for the right purpose, and then understanding that the results may not be 100% straightforward, Christine, like you yourself experienced, that some pieces of it we may understand, some pieces of it we may not have enough information to understand yet, and that information will be coming. So knowing that there is, or I guess having a path to access the genetic counselor again in the future, having a path to keep in up to date about new information as it relates to your test results. All of that becomes very important, especially when we add to that the fact that there are new therapies developed for rare and not rare conditions all of the time. And so medicine is changing, science is changing, and ultimately we hope that goal is improved health for everyone. The last piece I would add too is the part about family. So I think that fits in an umbrella for me that I would consider more focused on education. But how do we, as individuals, receive the results of our testing, understand what it means for us, but also be able to understand what it means for our family and help to hold those conversations? How do we tell our family members what they may need to know in order to better understand their health? So I think there is a lot that comes in precision medicine, especially the genetic part of precision medicine, that is far more encompassing than, say, a blood glucose result. But Arun, do you want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I totally agree with both the panelists, Tony and Vanessa. Just to add on top of it, like just to give a clear picture to the audience, is to make sure that if you're looking for something fun and fancy, then go to 23andMe, like for ancestry and stuff like that. But if you're really serious about your health, then you definitely need to talk to a genetic counselor, and you have a pre-test genetic counseling. So this is for you to understand what is the exact panel that will help you to get, probably any kind of potential answers related to genetics. And at the same time, once the results are out, you need a professional to help you understand what really the results mean to you. So this is where, the bridging, aspect of the knowledge has to be there in order for somebody to really take actions into their own health. So this is one aspect of it. And if somebody, wants to, look into 23andMe, think, oh, this is the ultimate truth. No, that's not the thing, because, especially I can give you one example for, they look for breast cancer, where they only screen for 3 genetic mutations. So what do you expect, as an end user to understand? Like they think, okay, they are negative and they think they are never going to get breast cancer. But that's like the problem, because the platform is totally different. And we are, somebody as a clinical genetic testing company like Invitae or, Ambry Genetics or other companies. So all of them, they look at a larger spectrum of, genes, and also the coverage is something which is much on a higher depth. So this is where you will not miss out on the mutations, which could potentially be found by the clinical genetic testing companies. So this is the reason why 23andMe should be considered more as a fun, thing, not like a serious aspect. Yeah. So that's on the last note. Yeah.
And I was wondering if I could make just a quick comment about something Vanessa said with respect to rare diseases and non-rare diseases. I think myself, I've worked in rare disease for a long time, so I oftentimes default in my discussions to those people and the conditions that are Mendelian or monogenic in their pathogenosis. But one thing I want to be clear about is what we're talking about for precision medicine is really applies to all kinds of diseases. I mean, drug developers are trying to figure out, ways to eliminate high cholesterol, for instance. I mean, they're trying to figure out cardiomyopathies. I mean, it's not just about rare diseases for us. And to the extent that I know we have programs, for instance, where people can get this kind of large, can get the molecular diagnosis, the medical diagnosis that Arun and Vanessa and myself have been talking about at our company at no charge. Now, just to be clear, you get what you pay for in this world, right? So there is an opportunity that the companies that are working on these programs are being able to take information, and many of it, as you talked about before, Christine, is like, how do you protect yourself? You make sure that if you're going to participate in one of these programs, the information that goes to the partner is de-identified. Okay, and that there's an obligation not to try to re-identify that person. Okay, and that's something that Arun was mentioning before. As companies get, and Vanessa actually, with tokenization. So as companies get more and more data and start to match things up, they oftentimes can re-identify people, and there has to be a prohibition about that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Tony, because I think that plays into, hopefully, Christine, a topic that will be addressed in future webinars, and that's about access, right?
Yeah.
Many of these things, whether they be genetic tests or other tests used in precision medicine, are very expensive, very costly, may have insurance coverage or may not. And so what are the mechanisms through which patients can actually have this testing in a timely manner? We don't want this kind of thing to drag around for years when it can benefit somebody's health today. So what are the new models to think about providing access? So thanks for bringing that up, Tony. And Christine, I hope that's something that comes up in the future.
That's definitely going to be something that comes up. You guys have stirred a million more questions, and we will continue our discussion on precision medicine. And we'll bring Curtis back at some point when we can figure out technology. But I want to thank you for giving me your perspectives and sharing them with me, and for hopping on a call at 8:30 in the morning and in the middle of the night, Arun. I don't want to keep you up more past your bedtime than we already are. But I wanted to say, if anyone wants to reach out to any of you, can you let them know how to contact you? If you have someone from industry looking for you, or if there's patients, how do they look up your company or what you're doing? Whatever you want to offer right now is up to you.
I'm happy to, anyone can find me on LinkedIn, and shoot me a message, I'll send you my email address there.
Tony?
Likewise, my LinkedIn is perfect. T Anthony Howell is what I go by. Please feel free to reach out to me. And also, if you go through Christine, and she'll be able to give you my email address as well.
And Arun, any?
Yeah, you can look into LinkedIn as well. So my name is Arun Kiran, and I work for Prenetics. So I work as the lead genetic counselor. So you can just look it up, and I have my email ID. So feel free to reach out. Yeah.
And I'm going to share some information about them later, along with some photos I took at Invite a few months ago. So look for those. And thank you again, you guys. I really appreciate it. I liked your perspective. I got dark all of a sudden. The lighting is weird. I'm outside trying to do this, and there's my head, my conscious. So we will.
Okay, this is really weird.
It is really weird. He's going to get out. We will say goodbye, and we thank you. We want to end it right at 9:30 to be, respectful of your time, and we will see you all soon. And I'll connect with you guys later. So thanks for joining us. If there's any questions, if they weren't answered in the chat, we will get to them and we'll bring you answers, and then we'll continue our conversation later. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. And let me end meeting. Bye, Arun.